There's a term in the occult community for someone who reads a lot of literature on their tradition, but never actually puts it into practice. Armchair magician. I think it was Donald Michael Craig who coined it, but I digress. And I've seen a lot of pagans in the community who worry that they're armchair pagans because they don't feel like they're doing enough for their faith. Are you doing enough for the gods? Let's take a look. Kairete. This week, I did a patron poll asking about several videos I'd put out comment feedback for, but hadn't made yet to see which folks would be the most interested in seeing. It ended up in a near tie between my daily practices as an Hellenist and Snakes of Hellenism, with daily practices pulling into the lead at the end. I figured it would be a fairly easy script, especially after all the stress that I've been going through for the last few weeks with my last couple. I'd be writing about myself after all, how hard could it be? But I put it off on my usual scripting day. Then put it off the next. And later that night, as I rested in my bed reviewing my day in an attempt to calm my crazy brain down enough to sleep, I realized the reason why had less to do with the writing and more to do with myself. You see, I have executive dysfunction, and several physical limitations that make daily practice difficult, if not at times impossible. And sometimes the executive dysfunction takes days that would otherwise have been allowed were it just a physical issue. No matter how much I love my gods or how badly I'd like to practice on those days, the thought will just reoccur on a loop in my head and not translate into any sort of action. Naturally, this made me feel like an imposter, in not so many words. How can I talk about my daily practices when they're not always daily for me? Then I realized that even if physical offerings and ritual weren't, I still frequently did devotional offerings in a less formal way, especially to Athena and Hermes in the form of the work I do for my channel and my daily knitting and Hellenic study. But not everyone has a career wrapped around their faith, nor does everyone with physical or mental limitations have the ability to do these sorts of offerings on bad days. And sometimes people just flat out get distracted or forget or feel disillusioned or disconnected or stop practicing for months or even weeks. Then the guilt sets in. Pagan traditions overall, as I've discussed in previous videos, tend to be orthopraxic. Ortho meaning right, and praxis meaning practice or action. You do paganism, and thereby are a pagan. And there are other folks in the community that have made pseudo-pep talk videos to this end, urging their followers outside into the wild to honor the gods they love, to prove that love to their dear leader and to the gods. To define paganism any other way is, as I've mentioned in my video on the word itself, would be to exclude too many folks that are pagans simply because of differing theology. And I agree that praxis is important and defines paganism. It's a big part of what makes us different from the predominant faiths that most of us grew up in. However, these get out and go videos and messages have a shadow effect, because it's implied that despite your love of the gods or your prior goddess, if you don't meet some kind of arbitrary standard of practice agreed upon silently by whichever community you're in, you cease being a real pagan. This problem is especially prevalent in Hellenism, where we have ancestors of faith like Hesiod urging us that true piety is a libation and a prayer upon waking and sleeping, that if we don't have the right attitude for worship, our offerings will be rejected, that to do any less than daily practice is to deny our very duty to the gods. And it's so easy to latch onto this and agree. Yes, you do paganism. Yes, I should practice every day. Yes, daily offerings. I love my gods. This is the least I should do. But there are other questions from here, because some folks in the community see their trade as a part of their worship, or integrate philosophical practices like Stoic contemplation or Platonist theurgy into their daily lives. Now, suddenly the bar is raised. People are making travel altars while stuck in the broom closet, are meditating on the nature of the universe on their lunch break, are contemplating their own demise to desensitize them to the idea and build virtue. Look, that person just went and studied ancient Greek to read the myths in their original language, and you haven't even managed to put out an offering this week yet. What is wrong with you? And you might even post about these feelings, and get reassured that everyone is at a different place in their journey and not to compare yourself. Yet, you still feel the undercurrent even in that reassurance. Because journey implies a destination. There's a place you should be trying to reach, an ideal of some kind, made up of all these people and posts and stories of beautiful artistic devotionals to the gods, and you feel like you'll never measure up. Of course, there are also those who might reply that you're right, you're not doing enough and you should feel bad, but they're dicks and we'll get to those ideas later. Now, my earlier admission of not always practicing formal ritual daily might look like an invitation to focus to call me a fraud again. Let it be known that this is actually a formal invitation to eat my whole ass and tell me it tastes like sunshine when they're done dislodging the cactus from theirs. But there's a reason I brought up my own experience and fear here. Because despite all the reassurances you might get from the community, that feeling still lingers in most of us. And I think a big part of that is caused by the fact that I rarely see them go much further than everyone is different and you're doing enough, which is a kindness all its own, and I don't want to diminish that. But I almost never see anyone go into the why of these feelings. In my experience, it's often the why that can help us heal. So let's talk about why. The first and most obvious reason is that many of us are closeted to some extent. Even if your significant other or close friends accept you, there's a very real risk in being openly pagan in regular life. You'd be hard-pressed to find many Christian bosses who will give you a day off to celebrate Panathenaia, let alone a week. And it's not as though even folks who live out in the countries that birthed these ancient faiths have the social reinforcement of their modern reconstructed practice. Most of us find ourselves, even with a support network if we're lucky enough to have one, surrounded by a culture and religion that constantly tells us that not only are we wrong, but that there's a punishment waiting for us for being wrong after we die. And I don't know a single person who came out of Christianity, as most of us have, who hasn't been up late at night questioning the very experiences that brought us to our current practices in light of this. What if we are wrong? What if there's a fire and brimstone waiting for us on the other side? What if these experiences really are some kind of mental projection, as anti-theists will often claim? Even for those of us who live on our own and are out to partners, maybe even in a fully pagan family of our own making, practicing in isolation, either because of your partner is being in a different faith or because your family is the only group you practice with, can still give that feeling of creeping doubt and fear. That cold, I'm alone. We turn online or try to find an IRL group to practice with, and for folks in larger traditions, that might even be possible. But that group might only practice once a week or once a month, or for the major holidays of your faith. And when you leave that island of acceptance, be it the Discord server or your in-person group or message boards, you're back in the jungle, back to being judged, back to alone. The ancients had an entire culture surrounding them and affirming their faith and experiences with the gods. That's not to say everyone saw things the same way, but it's highly unlikely the average person would be called crazy in the height of the cultural faith for making an offering. There wasn't a threat of Greek CPS to take their kids away for praying to Athena. It was normal. And because it was normal, it was often taught from birth as just the way things were. As I covered before, ancient peoples would integrate into ancient cultures and be surrounded by the social institutions that upheld their newfound beliefs. So even an outsider adopting new gods in a new culture would have that social reinforcement, though in most places in ancient times there was likely some xenophobia attached. They weren't trying to piece their practices together from ancient texts, scholarly analyses, claims of passing down traditions and families, and syncretic remnants of the faith in modern Christian sects. It was alive, breathing, vibrant, and all around them. As I'll continue to remind the focus in my audience, who I'm still convinced are lost if they're still here, even the modern successors to these ancient cultures still have many of these barriers that we do to expressing their faith. Hellenismos might be recognized as an ethnic religion in Greece, but despite being physically where the ancients made their offerings and carved the statues to the gods we love, ongoing persecution and legal battles remain. And no number of families who pass down remnants of ancient tradition can replace the living, breathing polis and the identity that communal practice gives an entire culture. That has largely been lost to all of us. And we build our islands and make our offerings, but there is still this untethered feeling that we should be doing more, often compounded by existing physical and mental limitations that would make the level of praxis we do difficult even in the ideal situation. So we long to build temples or communes, dream of the way that we can own our homes and paganize them in our yards, freely shout from the rooftops how much we love our gods free of judgment. And as someone who is in that position, whose house is pagan as hell, and who's in the process of saving up for building an outdoor shrine, who has an entire temple room dedicated to the gods in which I can practice freely, even that doesn't make that feeling go away. No amount of dedication and faith fully seems to make that feeling go away. I don't have a solution for you, apart from the same comfort and assurance that you are indeed doing enough, that not every one of the ancients would have had the money, let alone the time, to give offerings twice a day on a perfect calendar, that you don't need to go to Greece to worship the Theoi or build a relationship with them, that what you can study and learn at your own pace is enough. that what you feel for the gods is real, and that they are real, and that I believe in them too, and that even those of us who make content about them might not always worship daily or perfectly or even with the perfect confidence all of the time. That feeling that we need to prove ourselves is dastardly and sneaky and bred into us by our surroundings. By standing against the consensus of our surrounding cultures, it's inevitable that we feel alone or like we aren't doing enough. But you don't need to worship every single day, regardless of pain or struggle, to be a real pagan. You don't need to make a channel or write a book or start a blog to be a real part of the community. You don't need to be perfect, because those whom we got these practices from likely weren't either. They were human, just like us. Whether you know you're doing enough is between you and the gods, and you need to trust them to let you know and yourself to interpret the message honestly. I'm not discouraging people from worship either, don't get me wrong, but as I said in my video on devotional offerings, not everything we do for the gods has to be a tangible physical offering done in a formal ritual the way that the ancients would have. People have healthy, happy relationships with the gods on their own terms, and the least you can do for yourself is stop judging for them whether or not you are good enough. That's for them to decide with the full knowledge of what you're actually capable of versus the idealized image that you would like to become. Self-improvement is only healthy when it doesn't verge on superstition and self-torture. And though it is said that the Teoi in particular value virtue, both Aristotle and Epictetus acknowledge that what is virtuous varies based off the person in the situation. Virtue is doing the best you can, not the best that someone else can or could. Go a little easier on yourself. You're doing enough for now, and if you want to change that, plan around your worst days instead of your best and set reasonable goals for yourself. If you've never meditated before, an hour a day for a month straight is not reasonable. If you're in the closet, a 2-hour Pneumania ritual complete with hand-baked goods might not be reasonable either. Be honest with yourself, but not to the point of harm. There's a particular Stoic idea that I find useful here. The past is set. If you could have done better, you would have. The use of the past is in knowledge gained for the future pursuit of virtue. Shame ultimately is a refusal to accept the past or to try to change the future. The energy you dump into your shame will rob you of the energy you need to do the best you personally can. And that best might not match the ideal in your mind, yet or ever. That's okay. Our traditions should bring us joy, not suffering. Do what you can, but be honest about what you can. And if you didn't yesterday and you have the energy today, then go for it. Charis is built over a lifetime. It won't be destroyed in a day, week, month, or even a year. The gods aren't obsessing over every single hour of your life the way that you are. It's your life. You only have one to live, potentially. So do yourself a favor and maybe give yourself a break about the past and decide what you'll be happy with for yourself in the future, realistically. And know that when you're feeling doubts, you're not alone. Everybody's felt them at one point or another. Thank you so much for sticking through that. If you're new here, shame the subscribe button and make sure the like knows it's not doing enough. Drop down into the comments and let me know if you've ever felt this kind of insecurity and what you did about it. Or just call me a fraud and say that I only make these videos for the money I originally didn't even ask for from my audience and that I only make through voluntary, no pressure donations from fans of my work if that's your speed. I know y'all are gonna do it anyway, I might as well just preempt you because you're boring and you can't come up with anything better. Special thanks also to my patrons. You all voted on a topic that I do plan on making in the next few weeks, and because you asked me to look at my own practice, I was able to see a need in myself and the community that I hope this video helped fill even a little. It's tough out there, faith or no, and because of your monthly support, I can make videos like this that might only appeal to a small portion of my audience that really needs to hear this message. May the cycle of reciprocity between us ever remain positive. And remember, we're stronger together.